Welcome to Mind Pilot. This is Dr. Jana Price-Sharps, and I'm your host today. One of the things that I have noticed over the years is that probably because what first responders tend to see and veterans see, especially combat veterans, most of it's negative. I mean, there might be some comedy here and there, but most of it is very macabre, right? Very negative, very dark. A lot of death, a lot of trauma. And so over time, that begins to kind of erode how you start feeling about life. And so when you hang out with, it could be ER people, working in the ER. It could be ambulance people, paramedics. It could be fire personnel. It could be deputies. It could be officers. It could be veterans that have gone through combat. But they tend to start viewing the world in a very negative way, kind of disliking people, and seeing very little hope in the world. And you know what? When you start to shift that, when you start to really work on yourself and begin healing a little bit, the other thing that I've noticed is that when people start getting better and they're at work and they walk in with a smile on their face, everybody pounces on them. What are you happy about? Why are you smiling? What's good about today? There's nothing good about today. And then they go on a rant about how everything's terrible in our country, or how everything's terrible about management, or how the community is terrible, or whatever. But that rage, that anger, that adrenaline, right, just starts kind of pouring out of folks. And so I guess the question is, how do you be happy when you're around a lot of people that aren't happy? Well, the first thing is, be careful what conversations you get drawn into. I've talked about rabbit holes, and you may be working with colleagues that are just jumping down rabbit holes all day, right? You get in between calls, or you get in between different things that you're doing at the job, and they start talking about how they hate this and how they hate this and how this is terrible and that's terrible. Don't join in. Find something to do. If you're around them all the time, just say, hey, I'm going to go over and do this for a little bit. Break up the conversations. Don't contribute to them, because that's the other thing that a lot of times people will do is they jump in and then they start on that bandwagon. Every time you start on that bandwagon, you're releasing adrenaline. Every time you're releasing adrenaline, you're getting more aggressive, right? It's your fight or flight chemicals. First responders and veterans do not flee, they fight. And so I've watched people that are perfectly calm, and then one person brings up somebody, in admin, or somebody that's higher rank or whatever, and within minutes, the other person's mad. Now they're going back and forth. They're both mad, and they keep talking about how everything's terrible, everything sucks. Then it gets on to what's happening in the country, and this is terrible, and that's terrible, and these people are terrible, and this group is terrible, and it just escalates, and people escalate each other. So how can you live a life, be happy, and still be a first responder or in the military in combat? Well, the first thing you got to do is, when you do have time off, you do have those breaks, don't spend the entire time talking about how terrible everything is, because that's going to focus your mind. Remember, whatever you're saying to yourself is setting your GPS. If you're talking about how terrible everything is, that's what your mind is going to focus on. And the more you think about something, the more you're going to look for it. So if you're focused on how terrible everything is, then you're going to focus more and more on, oh yeah, and that's terrible too, and this is terrible too, and that's terrible too. You know, that's where your mind is going to focus. Now, I'm not a Pollyanna-ish kind of person. In other words, I'm not saying everything's happy and everything's wonderful and we should all sing Kumbaya. That isn't what I'm saying. What I am saying, though, is you can either get down rabbit holes where you can't get out and you feel terrible, and you go down there with your colleagues and maybe people that you're in long-term relationships with, or you can resist that urge and you can begin to focus on some of the good things in life. How do you do that again? You need to take those breaks from work. You have to. And that means if you're working a lot of overtime and some of it is optional, quit doing that. Do not get yourself into a financial situation where you have to work overtime. If you're already in that financial situation, maybe you go to a financial planner and you figure out a way to manage your money in such a way that you don't have to work a lot of overtime. I understand that there's order back and mandatory overtime, and a lot of times you do not have control over your schedule. But when you do, take those breaks and then do something fun with those breaks. Don't just sit at home and turn on the TV. Go do something fun. You may not feel like it. I get it. You know, sleep in your first day off, get some extra rest, and then go do something. You have to plan it, because if you don't plan it, you may just be sitting in front of the TV or playing video games, and then your whole time off is wasted. You know, go fishing, go out and do things that you enjoy, whatever those things are. Your mind has to rest. It has to get away from the trauma. It has to get away from the darkness. It has to get away from the death and destruction. It has to. Your brain is not meant to see that day in and day out all the time, and then when you're off, talking about it all the time. You've got to play. And I know a lot of times I have found first responders don't give themselves the right to play. You've got to play. You've got to have a good time. You've got to rest. You have to sleep. You know, so on your first day off, if you need to sleep most of the day, then sleep most of the day. That's, you know, if that's what you need to do. Catch up on your rest, but then go do something. I understand there's chores around the house and things that have to be done, but don't let that be all of your time off. You know, you need to have something to look forward to. One of my most favorite people in the world, he was my field training officer, and not literally, but I call him that because I did lots and lots of ride-alongs with this poor man and asked him about 7,000 questions. But he told me, he says, I always have a vacation planned. And I always have something fun planned. And I also don't hang around a lot of coworkers when I'm off. I hang around people that like to play golf or like to go hiking. And I enjoy life. When I work hard. When I'm off, I play. And he was the most centered, most mentally healthy law enforcement officer I think I've ever met. And that was because he allowed his brain to rest. He allowed his brain to recoup. A lot of people don't allow themselves to do that. Be careful what you're listening to on TV. Be careful what music you're listening to. You know, I had a guy that wasn't sleeping, and then I found out, you know, he's watching horror movies right before he goes to bed. Well, he's a first responder. Your brain goes from 0 to 1,000 in a second because you're used to responding to calls very, very quickly. You don't have a lot of time to kind of get ready or get dressed or get, you know, wherever you're going to go or whatever you're going to do. You don't have that time. So you go from 0 to 1,000. So if you're watching a horror movie and you start to get amped up, you start to get adrenalized, your system is going to over-adrenalize. You're not going to be able to sleep. I said, watch your horror movies. If that's what you like to do, go for it. But do it during the day. Do it on your days off and do it Saturday afternoon or whatever your day off is. Watch comedy at night. Cool your system down. You know, I had another guy that he'd get in major traffic and he'd start listening to, you know, heavy metal bands. And then he was going in and out of traffic and road rage and all that. And I'm like, yeah, maybe you should dial it back to, I don't know, big band or something that is a little less aggressive, little less angry. And he started to do that. And he says, you know, I don't have nearly as much road rage now. It really does impact your mood. Music has a huge impact on many people's mood. They don't even really realize it, but there's actually been some pretty good studies about heavy metal and the impact on people's driving. You know, so maybe if you're really adrenalized and you're driving home after a long shift, maybe you don't put on the heavy metal so that you're even more adrenalized when you walk in. And now we're back to the refrigerator, which was another session that we did earlier, you know. So thinking in terms of what can you listen to? There's lots of positive podcasts out there and lots of funny stuff out there. And if you don't like the current funny stuff, go backwards and listen to funny stuff 20 years ago or 15 years ago. You know, start laughing. Laughing is one of the best things that you can do for your system, and it cools you off. You know, take those mental breaks at work. Take the 5-minute break. Take the 10-minute break. Listen to some happy music. Look at some beautiful pictures from things that you've done with your family or your friends. Let your system cool down. But don't join in to those people that want to convince you that everything sucks and then you die. Because you know what? You have the right to live a happy life. And if you continually are listening to people that talk about how crappy everything is, you're going to feel crappy, you know? So take care of yourself. You have the right to a happy life. I hope you subscribe to this program, and I hope you have a wonderful day. This is Dr. Jana Price-Sharps with Mind Pilot.